Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we are diving into the fascinating story of the Washington quarter dollar, one of the most iconic and longest-running coin designs in United States history. A coin that has traveled through nearly a century of American life, culture, and economic change, first introduced in 1932 to honor the 200th anniversary of George Washington's birth, replacing the standing Liberty quarter and marking a major shift in U.S. coinage by permanently placing a real historical figure on a circulating coin rather than a symbolic representation of liberty, and this decision reflected a growing national desire to celebrate founding figures in everyday life, with sculptor John Flanagan chosen to design the coin based on a classical bust of Washington created by Jean-Antoine Houdon, resulting in a dignified left-facing portrait that emphasized strength, leadership, and restraint, qualities deeply associated with Washington's legacy, while the reverse featured a powerful heraldic eagle with outstretched wings perched on a bundle of arrows and framed by olive branches, symbolizing both military readiness and a desire for peace. And from its very first year, the Washington quarter was struck in 90% silver and 10% copper, giving it intrinsic value that made it both a practical medium of exchange and a store of wealth. And during the early 1930s, the coin entered circulation at a time when America was still struggling through the Great Depression, meaning many of these early quarters were heavily used, saved during times of uncertainty, or even melted decades later when silver prices rose, which is why surviving high-grade examples from the 1930s are far scarcer today than mintage figures suggest. And as the years passed, the Washington quarter quietly became a workhorse of the American economy, used daily in markets, transportation, and commerce, embedding itself into the routines of millions of people while simultaneously recording the story of a nation moving through hardship, recovery, and global conflict, making this coin not just a piece of currency but a historical artifact that reflects the resilience and evolution of the United States itself. And as production of the Washington quarter expanded beyond its commemorative purpose, it quickly became clear that this design would endure far longer than originally planned, because the public response was overwhelmingly positive, and the coin's appearance conveyed a sense of permanence and trust that aligned perfectly with Washington's image as the nation's first president. And throughout the late 1930s and into the 1940s, the quarter circulated widely during a period marked by global instability and war, passing through the hands of soldiers, factory workers, and families on the home front, while the U.S. Mint continued striking the coin at Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, each mint leaving subtle differences in strike quality and detail that today help collectors identify origin and desirability. And during World War II, the demand for metal intensified, placing pressure on minting operations and resulting in variations that modern numismatists study closely, such as weak strikes, die fatigue, and planchet inconsistencies. Yet despite these challenges, the Washington quarter retained its symbolic strength, with the eagle on the reverse serving as a quiet reminder of national unity and determination. And as America emerged from the war into a period of economic expansion, the quarter became even more deeply woven into daily life, used in public transportation, vending machines, parking meters, and everyday transactions, making it one of the most heavily circulated coins of the 20th century, a factor that greatly influences condition rarity today, because while millions were produced annually, most surviving examples show significant wear, making sharply struck, well-preserved pieces increasingly scarce and desirable. And this contrast between high mintages and low survival in premium condition is one of the key reasons the Washington quarter continues to attract collectors who appreciate how ordinary objects can transform into valuable historical treasures over time. By the early 1950s, the Washington quarter had firmly established itself as a cornerstone of American coinage, yet beneath its familiar appearance the series was quietly building layers of complexity that would later fascinate collectors, because changes in minting technology, die preparation, and production pressure began to affect strike quality and surface detail, particularly as demand for circulating coinage increased during the post-war economic boom. And while the basic design remained unchanged, subtle differences in lettering sharpness, feather detail on the eagle, and Washington's hair and facial features created distinct visual characteristics between years and mints, many of which were overlooked at the time but are now closely studied by numismatists. And during this era, the silver content of the quarter continued to give it intrinsic value, leading many people to save rolls or jars of coins as a form of quiet wealth preservation, a habit that would later play a crucial role when silver prices surged, and as the 1960s approached, the rising cost of precious metals began to threaten the practicality of silver coinage, setting the stage for one of the most significant transitions in U.S. monetary history, because inflation, industrial demand, and international market pressures were driving silver prices upward at a pace that made it increasingly expensive for the government to continue striking circulating coins with intrinsic metal value. And this growing Tension between tradition and economic reality placed the Washington Quarter at the center of a national debate about the future of money, value, and public trust, as Americans began to notice coins disappearing from circulation due to hoarding, while banks struggled to keep enough change available for everyday transactions. And throughout this period the Washington Quarter became a silent witness to a changing economy, one in which confidence in paper currency and fiduciary coinage was being tested. And even before the official end of silver coinage, many quarters from the late 1950s and early 1960s were already being set aside by the public, reducing the number of high-grade examples that would survive in circulation, which explains why certain dates from this era remain surprisingly elusive in pristine condition today. And as these pressures intensified, the Washington Quarter stood on the brink of transformation, poised between its identity as a silver-backed symbol of stability and its future role as a modern circulating coin designed for efficiency rather than intrinsic worth, a turning point that would forever change how the coin was perceived, used, and collected. The turning point for the Washington Quarter arrived in 1965, when the United States formally ended the use of silver in circulating quarters, replacing the long-standing 90% silver composition with a copper-nickel clad structure that featured a pure copper core sandwiched between outer layers of copper and nickel. A decision driven not by aesthetics but by economic necessity, as rising silver prices made it impossible to maintain precious metal coinage without significant financial loss. And this transition marked a profound psychological shift for the American public, because for the first time in generations the quarter no longer carried intrinsic metal value, becoming instead a purely symbolic representation of trust in government-issued money. And during the initial years of this change the Mint removed dates from coins between 1965 and 1967 to discourage hoarding, resulting in massive production numbers that flooded circulation yet ironically created scarcity in high-grade condition due to rushed manufacturing and reduced quality control. And these early clad quarters often display weak strikes, muted luster, and planchet flaws that make sharply struck examples exceptionally difficult to locate today, while at the same time the coexistence of silver and clad quarters in circulation caused confusion, speculation, and widespread saving of older coins, permanently removing millions of silver Washington quarters from everyday use. And as the clad era took hold, the Washington Quarter adapted once again, continuing to serve commerce while reflecting the broader transformation of American money from tangible value to fiduciary trust, a shift that reshaped collecting habits, market dynamics, and public perception of coinage for decades to come. As the clad Washington Quarter settled into daily circulation, collectors began to recognize that while the intrinsic silver value was gone, a new form of rarity was emerging through condition, minting quality, and unexpected varieties, because the sheer volume of quarters produced during the late 1960s and 1970s often masked significant differences in strike sharpness, surface preservation, and die integrity, and many coins left the mint already compromised by bag marks, weak details, or improper metal bonding, making high-grade examples surprisingly elusive, especially from the Denver Mint, where heavy production demands frequently resulted in softer strikes. And during this era the San Francisco Mint played a unique role by focusing on proof coinage, introducing millions of collectors to mirror-like fields, frosted devices, and later deep cameo contrasts that elevated the aesthetic appeal of the Washington Quarter, while changes in hubbing techniques and die preparation quietly produced doubled dies, repunched mint marks, and subtle design anomalies that would only be fully appreciated decades later. And as the 1980s approached, cost-cutting measures further reduced minting quality, resulting in flat details and reduced luster that now define some of the hardest modern Washington quarters to locate in top condition, proving that rarity is not always tied to age or metal content but often to survival and preservation. And through all these changes the Washington Quarter continued its steady presence in American life, evolving from a silver-backed coin of stability into a modern collectible shaped by production challenges, technological shifts, and the growing sophistication of the numismatic marketplace. By the time the late 1990s arrived, the Washington Quarter once again stood at the center of a historic transformation with the launch of the 50-state quarters program in 1999, a bold initiative designed to renew public interest in coin collecting while celebrating the cultural and historical diversity of the United States. And although the obverse portrait of George Washington remained largely unchanged, the reverse of the coin became a rotating canvas for state symbols, landmarks, and heritage, introducing an entirely new dimension to the quarter series that attracted millions of new collectors, many of whom had never previously paid attention to coinage. And this program fundamentally reshaped the way people viewed the Washington Quarter, turning it from a familiar utilitarian coin into an educational and collectible item, while also generating unprecedented mintages that ensured widespread availability yet paradoxically created condition rarity due to the rapid pace of production and circulation. And as the program progressed, Changes in dye quality, strike depth, and metal bonding produced a wide range of visual characteristics that modern collectors now study closely, and beyond the State series, the Washington Quarter continued to evolve through later programs such as the District of Columbia and U.S. Territories releases, America the Beautiful Quarters, and special collector issues in silver and proof finishes, all of which expanded the scope of the series while reinforcing Washington's enduring presence at the heart of U.S. coinage, demonstrating how a single design could adapt across generations while maintaining its symbolic identity. As the Washington Quarter moved fully into the modern era, its story became not just one of metal and design but of cultural memory, collecting psychology, and the way ordinary people interact with history through everyday objects, because despite countless redesigns on the reverse and technological changes at the Mint, the obverse portrait of George Washington continued to anchor the series, serving as a visual bridge between generations, and collectors began to realize that the true depth of the Washington Quarter lay not only in its famous silver issues or widely advertised programs, but also in the nuanced details that separate common coins from extraordinary survivors, such as strike sharpness on Washington's hair above the ear, the crispness of the eagle's feathers on earlier reverses, the presence or absence of full details on clad-era coins, and the elusive balance between luster, surface preservation, and originality, all of which determine whether a coin is merely circulated, change, or a high-grade collectible. And as third-party grading services gained influence, the Washington Quarter became a proving ground for condition rarity, with population reports revealing that many high mintage dates exist in surprisingly low numbers at the top of the grading scale, driving demand and prices upward for coins once dismissed as ordinary, while at the same time error coins and varieties such as off-center strikes, clipped planchets, double dies, and transitional composition errors added another layer of fascination, reminding collectors that even in an age of automation the minting process remains vulnerable to human and mechanical imperfections, and beyond the technical aspects the Washington Quarter also took on emotional significance, because for many collectors it represents a starting point, the first coin pulled from pocket change, the first folder filled, or the first spark of curiosity that led to a lifelong interest in numismatics, and this accessibility has ensured the Quarter's enduring popularity, as it allows both beginners and advanced collectors to engage with the same series at different levels of depth, from assembling affordable date and mint sets to pursuing elite condition registry collections, and internationally the Washington Quarter has become one of the most recognizable symbols of American coinage, circulating far beyond U.S. borders through travel, trade, and collecting markets, reinforcing its status as a global icon, and as digital platforms, online auctions, and social media continue to reshape how coins are bought, sold, and discussed, the Washington Quarter remains a constant presence, frequently featured in discussions about hidden value, overlooked rarities, and the idea that treasure can still be found in plain sight, and this enduring relevance underscores why the Washington Quarter is more than just a denomination or a design, because it encapsulates nearly a century of American economic shifts, artistic choices, technological evolution, and public engagement, standing as a reminder that even the most familiar objects can carry extraordinary stories when viewed through the lens of history, preservation, and curiosity, and it is this combination of accessibility, depth, and narrative richness that ensures the Washington Quarter will continue to captivate collectors and storytellers alike for generations to come. Thanks for watching.